Of course! That is, if Metro Man can withstand the full, concentrated power of the sun! Fire!
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, I am SocioPsycho, and this is Mob Reviews. And today we're going to take a look at Attack of the Alien Robot Monsters. This is created by Crayfix Games, available for PC, Mac, and Linux. It is a top-down tower defense game, but how well does it actually do that and pull that off? And that is what we will dive into today. And we will begin in the options menu. Now it is nice that there is a large berth for screen resolutions, so that's appreciated. The game has been running at 60 frames per second with no crashing, tearing, or clipping. It does have VSync, which is definitely appreciative. One thing you need to keep in mind is while it does have music sliders, you can only do it from a main page options menu, not the in-game options menu, which is a little bit unfortunate. As some of the sounds are loud, it is nice it is in there. It would have just been even more nice not to have to exit the game that you're in to be able to actually change the volume. As you can see, they only have the on or off in most basic circumstances, so having the music slider in the game would have been nice versus saying, oh wow, I'm in the middle of a game, it's loud, let me exit the game, change it. So it's not a huge deal because they have it at least somewhere, but still it would have been nice for posterity purposes. Now when it comes to a tower defense game, there are two main factors which you need to look at, and that is the level design and the tower defense layout, and these sort of go hand in hand with each other as the different levels bring up different challenges as your towers and more towers that you acquire throughout the game increase. So in the beginning, you need to have certain level designs in order to challenge the player in making it difficult, and as you get through the game, as enemies become more abundant and stronger, and your towers become more difficult, the level and complexity of the maps should also become more complex to help balance out the fact that you have an increase in strength. In this regard to the level design of the game, I found it to be magnificent. There were some times that it was fairly difficult due to not knowing exactly where the enemy is going to come out of. If we look at the in-game interface here, the interface is very simplistic. On the right side, you have the amount of scrap you use, which is used to build the towers. The health points, which will go down if you allow enemies to escape, and the level round that you are on. The other areas are the menu, hero abilities, and a speed toggler. It would have been nice to have a ×2 speed toggler rather than just a ×1. If we look at the bottom corner, you can see an arrow, it's a fast forward button. And while the majority of the time, probably around 90% of the time, the ×1 speed increase is more than enough. But there are certain maps where you either are redoing it so you know what to expect, so you're prepared a little bit more for that, and there's a dragging on feeling. So it would have been nice to have at least a ×2 speed increase to make up for those shortcomings. Myself personally, the majority of the game, I just played it on ×1 speed and I didn't have any issues. Sometimes when it got really hairy, I bopped it down to normal speed, but otherwise it usually just kept it on without any issue. The second gripe is that there is no way to see what's coming next. Now this may be good and something you desire, or it might be a little bad. I look at it as bad because in the austerity purposes of you are being attacked by an enemy army, you would have scouts or radar or something to see exactly what's coming up so you could sort of plan a little bit better. If you were smart and careful about what you created and how you created your layout, you could get through, but there are certain maps and certain times where you'll get to the final round and not knowing exactly what's going to come out, they speed through. Having even a tiny bit preparational option would have been appreciated. Now you can chalk that up to something that will add to the difficulty because you're not sure what's going to come next, but I look at it as more of a little annoying because that means my chance of replaying is higher out of frustration, not enjoyment. The levels and the maps get more complex as you go through, as I said earlier, which is beautiful. I never felt as if I was replaying a map that I had earlier just with different units. They continuously kept the designs fresh, which is unexpected because it's a tower defense, so you're thinking, Well, how can they keep it fresh for so long when you just need to get from one point to another? Well, there are multiple areas and times where you're not just protecting against one entry point for the enemy. There are times where you'll have 4 or 5 gates that you have to protect, which really add to the need to understand exactly what your towers do and the best tactical locations to place them down. One thing that I found to be definitely true is this game does require a certain amount of knowledge not only upon what your towers do and how they can be synergized together, but also a tactical mindset of where to place them, which I definitely appreciate because it's usually not something you see in a tower defense game. Now, there's always a power creep when it comes to tower defense games, and we're going to go over the tower structures, or some of them, right now, to see the balance in between the towers that you have, towers you start with, and how you progress and level up, because it's not like you would expect with a simplistic tower defense game of, oh, rank 1 tower, rank 2 tower. The towers are very interchangeable, and as you increase their level, depending if you want to, it turns the tower into a completely different style, which can be beneficial to certain enemies in taking them down. But you really have to make sure that you're going for the correct layout. Now we'll start with the simplistic military bunker, and as you can see, you have the stat option on the side, which shows exactly how much damage and output this is. And if we add another marine to it, then it will increase the fire rate. So there are different upgrades throughout each of the towers, and when we actually update the tower itself into an outpost, you can see that the damage is increased and we have new options available which increases that tower directly, whether it be an increase of damage, reload time, or mortar attacks. When we again select one of those upgrades, we have another tower, which is availability to bring us into. And as you can see here, now we have sort of a flamethrower department, which again goes into an entire missile structure, which has its own high tier abilities to help deal with the enemies. There's a large tech tree in this game, and what I've found is you go through the game as we look here, you start with a basic outpost on the left bottom corner that can go into a sniper outpost, which can be useful, which then goes into a gauss tower, which is very helpful in taking out heavy armored opponents, or you can go to an anti-tank infantry outpost from the flamethrower one. What I've found is that going into the perimeter defense for a flamethrower and then either the tank or the rocket is not that powerful. It's not that useful, and it doesn't really work that well against the majority of the enemies in comparison to something like the tech lab that is upgraded to a science lab, which does mass AoE damage and helps destroy enemies in a large radius. Now, if you bundle that with a EMP generator that helps stun enemies, you're looking at destroying the majority of the tiny enemies. So if the enemy force comes out with 100 troops and 20 of those are really strong enemies, but now you have 80 little guys, those two towers combined together will just wreck the majority of those other 80 troops, which means that when you go over to your armaments, you can put something down like a gauss tower, which will destroy the more heavy, impervious attributes. Even when we go to the most simplistic of barracks, you start off, and as you increase through the game, these barracks do change. They become more powerful as you progress forward, and you have the option of a heavy armor or a spec ops marine, which play different from each other. So it really is about what is the best situation tactically for you. Me personally, I end up using heavy armor troops more than anybody else, as they just have a lot more DPS output than using something like a tank in an exo factory. With the enemies that do get by, it's not exactly things I need to tank, it's more about finishing that slight amount of DPS off on them. And what I like about seeing the tech tree like this in an optional page you can open up is that you really have ease of access so you don't get confused. Now, where the power creep comes from the balance of his towers, is that when it comes to the tech lab, you're usually going to go with one or two things. You're going to go for that combination of getting rid of all the little troops, maxed with a stun outpost, or you're going to go for an air assault unit, which will send a jet and it will attack enemies with a giant laser beam from the sky, which can be very useful if the tower layout of the map is more suited for that style. But there are certain towers which you really never use, or while you can find some tactical element to it, it doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of things due to how powerful the other abilities are. With the combination I listed before being so powerful, unless being forced, building drone hosts really does not make any sense. They do not attack the air units, so they're useless against air, and while they may help take out shields, the stun tower takes out shields as well. And where an area that you could be contested in using these would be for the drones that have a anti-armor capability to attack heavier targets. But what falls down to more of the issue in using that as a tactics is the AI for these drones is pretty bad, and you can't tell them to go for the heaviest armored troops. So what will happen is they'll end up flying to the first person in the ranks, and because they have such a huge range to be able to fly across the regions of a map, they can usually end up in a very complex and confusing mannerism where, due to their flight pattern and their AI capability and not being able to actually tell them who to attack, you lose so much more time in the DPS category than you would if you had something else. So unless you're being forced to use a drone building, the entire drone tech tree is pretty much useless. Now yes, like I said, there's always tactical capabilities, you can really make it work if you really put some effort into it, but it's just not the same of a power structure. And that goes roughly the same with Microwave Caster as well. While it is a nice ability and it can be useful in certain situations, those situations you really have to balance out in comparison to another tower that I could place down. Do I really want this one? On the Marine side, it is not that bad, as the Sniper Tower is useful, the Gauss Cannon is useful, the Marines are useful, and it depends exactly what type of situation you're in as to what type of final Marine that you want. Do you need a tank that's really heavy hitter and be able to survive a lot while your towers do DPS? Or do you need strong DPS that can also be medium tanks? Or do you need ghosts, which can do a lot of damage and stun enemies in their place and not engage in melee? One issue that I found is that the AI troops do have a little bit of a problem when it comes to engaging into combat. When an enemy approaches, not just one of your Marines will go forward to attack, but they all will. Instead of one tanking the enemy and the other two firing, they all move up, which completely destroys your continuous DPS. Now, for the Spec Op Marines, this is detrimental because they are not as strong as the other ones, so once you get the ability to cloak them so they will not attack in melee combat, that's really the only time that they truly become invaluable. Other than that, they're not as useful because they don't have the melee strength as the other two do. So it does depend, at least on the more armamental side, what tactic you're going for. Although I found the flame turret to be utterly useless, the rest fairly balanced out well. Where on the electric side, you really only have two obvious choices because they're so strong and the rest are so weak or poorly designed that the power creep on that side is just insane. But while there are certain towers which are more obvious to use, it still comes down to exactly understanding where to place these towers. It falls into a little bit of a too many towers, not enough weight behind most of them, so that's where the issue arises, as one is obviously better than the other. The enemy also comes in a very large and diverse amount of troops. In the beginning of the game, you're dealing more with little troops that aren't that powerful, but there's a lot of them, and as the game scales up, you get into more heavy armament with all the little troops, leading to some later end game units, which give buffs, speed increases to their allies, making them run right through your defenses, so you really need to make sure that you have the capability to deal with them or slow them down if you're able to. I also appreciate that there's a large variety of bosses in the game throughout the different levels. There are 5 bosses, and they may require you to replay it at least once or twice, though I did not find them overly hard. When we talk about balance, the enemy troops work very well with each other. They have a lot more synergy with each other than most of your towers do with each other, which is very nice because it adds an extra level of pressure. The balance of the game does fall down to definitely knowing and understanding what you have to do, and while there is a tier system in the game that helps alleviate some of this pressure and makes you feel like, yay, I'm progressing, I'm leveling up, as the game is balanced on a 3-star victory rating, upon where if you have 20 health points by the end of a level, you will gain 3 stars. These stars can be used to buy upgrades, which will increase in their amount of cost each tier that you purchase. As you can see, you have Marines, Technology, and Headquarters, Headquarters just increases the amount of scrap that you have and some of the hero options that you have in using your hero power. And technology is roughly the same thing. It decreases the amount cost for using electric towers or damaging towers and increases their damage output. So as you can see, as you level up, it really depends on where you want to put, and there is a reset button as well. This comes all into the balance of dealing with the enemy because the game is not easy. It starts off not on a noob level, but a moderate level. You need to understand tower defense games. You need to understand what's going on and be able to read. That's pretty much the important one as to what your towers do, how to implement those. There's a certain level of knowledge that you need to have to at least begin into this game already, because it doesn't throw you in a rude way. It just has a high entry bar of difficulty, not a drastic one, but one where it's beneficial if you know what you're doing to begin with. And it keeps to a moderate climate throughout the majority of the game, but when you get to the middle, it quickly scales from moderate to veteran. And then as it progresses to about the 70 percentile of the game completion, it goes to hardcore, but then around 80 it drops back down to moderate due to the real power creep of your different towers. The combinational capability of these towers really give you some oomph and strength that allow you to just destroy the mass majority of the enemies so they can't flood past you. You still have the larger ones, yes, and you still need to be careful, yes, but it scales it down because of how powerful you become. Which in some ways is decent because you do feel a sense of progression. You do feel a sense of, wow, my upgrades and my skill, my management, everything else really has helped me get to where I want, because the end boss, the final mission that you have, is not a simplistic, oh, let me just rely on all the abilities I've acquired so far. No, it really makes you have to understand, due to the complexity of the level design, that, where should I put these troops? What is the best situation? Where should I ensure that I get the maximum protection throughout the game? With the availability to reset your ability points, there is a slight window of if you get stuck on a certain map which requires you to use certain towers, then perhaps you can reset your abilities to give those towers a bonus. I never did something like that because I'm just more of a I will deal with what I have and push through, but it is an option nonetheless. So for balance purposes, it gets by, but it's definitely not an entry starter game for tower defenses. It is definitely something that you need to have a little bit of knowledge for, and if you want to complete this game, you will need to work for it. The key factor to understand, though, is that it never wasted my time. I never felt like the game or the system itself was frustrating because of the imbalance in between towers and enemies. No, the only fault that would force me to replay a level was from myself, not the game, because I didn't have the correct tower layout and I wasn't being tactically savvy enough for a certain mission or two. Which brings us to the story. The story is pretty simplistic. It is where you land on this planet to colonize it, and upon doing so that you find alien attack robots are trying to kill you with intense prejudice. The story progresses in a small military manner upon giving a slight description as you progress forward in the individual maps in a small written area. Now, the story is not something that you're really going to dive into and be like, oh my goodness, it's so sad, or it's so beautiful, it's an amazing writing, but it definitely does exactly what it needs to, which ties a purpose and a reason and a progressional sense as you complete and go through the game. The towers, the level designs, the understanding of the enemies and the troops, it all ties well with the story. And while the story may be minimalistic, it's good enough to actually get you through. And it's like, yeah, that was, it wasn't bad. Or, hey, what's going on here? Or, what's going to happen next? Or where are we going next? It's not a huge factor of the game, but it fits in its nice little layer upon the cupcake that this game is. So at the end of the day, how does it all fit together? How does it handle? And the towers, they do have some of their issues with using the usage of one over the other, but it's not as bad as in some others. And there are some variables which rely more on tactical knowledge and development and deployment, which I definitely appreciate. The enemies and the levels that you face against continuously rotate, so you feel challenged, that you feel pressured, that there is a certain amount of resistance. Even though you upgrade your abilities and you continuously increase your knowledge throughout the game, there's always this next level of, well, what's going to happen now? Or how is this going to affect me? And what do I need to be careful for? The balance helps tie all these factors together. While there is the occasional element of where you lost because of not knowing exactly what's going to come up next, or allowing, maybe if you're a completionist, one stupid plane to get through your ranks and take one of your health points away so you have to restart, depending on how devoted you are to getting 3 stars, really depends on how bonkers it will drive you. But the balance in between the aesthetics, the game, the mechanics, and how everything works together, I had no issues. There was no frustration in any part due to the way the game treated me. I didn't feel like it wasted my time. I didn't feel like, oh, the amount of hours I spent in this game were for nothing, or wow, that was it. It was satisfying, it was enjoyable, it was challenging, it was delightful. And the story is the frosting upon the cupcake. It is not anything amazing, but it gets the job done. So, I can absolutely recommend this game. I enjoyed it, it was fun, it was challenging, but you have to understand that this is not an entry-level tower defense game. If you are really serious about getting into tower defense games, then yeah, this could be a place for you. But if you are not really aware of what's going on in the base universe of the genre, then I would recommend you stay away from this one, as it can be a little daunting in certain areas, which can lead to frustration, which will end up not having as much fun, which will put you off from the entire genre itself. There's a tactical element under it. It's not just put tower down and stop enemy going through. That is, yes, of course, the basis, but the tactical element of stopping the enemies and making sure you utilize the correct towers or correct locations against the correct opponents is where the beauty of a good tower defense comes out, and this one really shines on that, and it takes the aspect and the heart of that element of the core of the genre and brings it forthright, which I appreciate and respect. So ladies and gentlemen, easy recommend. I have been SocioPsycho, this has been Mob Reviews. I thank you for watching, I hope this has been a help to you, and I'll see you next time.